At the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, we saw Modi and Putin reaffirm their special relationship. Anna, what the heck is going on here? What is happening?
Well, what's going on is India's need for energy security. And since the beginning of Russia's invasion into Ukraine in 2022, India became a huge exporter of Russian oil. And so as Donald Trump kind of ramps up for secondary sanctions against Russia, he's essentially urging India to avoid purchasing Russian oil. But what was really interesting and what was on full display at the SEO summit was the reality that honestly, the United States and its influence is waning and is not really having much of an impact on what Narendra Modi, the leader of India, is willing to do. So as a result, Trump has responded with, some pretty significant tariffs against India. So let me walk you through all of that. So Trump, let me just note, had already slapped India with 25% tariffs as part of his whole Liberation Day tariff policy. And the whole idea was that we have a trade deficit with India. And as a result, Trump finds that to be deeply unfair and slaps him with 25% tariffs. Now, the point was to renegotiate that, but the negotiations haven't been going so well because of the fact that India is essentially saying, no, we're going to go ahead and buy oil. Check out this headline from the New York Times. India will buy Russian oil despite Trump's threats. Officials say there is growing sense in India that its leaders should not allow American policymaking to shape its choices on vital energy supplies. And so analysts and officials in New Delhi said that if the move were intended to pressure Russia, its efficacy was questionable, considering that China and Turkey and two other major importers of Russian oil. And Trump hasn't really approached them about how they need to stop taking Russian oil. Plus, according to the New York Times, replacing Russian oil with new sources could bring additional costs to closer sources of oil, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, sell at a higher price to Asian countries because of a policy called Asian Premium, maintained by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. And so then the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit happens, which was attended by many of the US's adversaries or foes. That includes, China, which hosted the event, of course, Russia, Iran. More and more countries are kind of aligning themselves with that side in this multipolar world. And also, of course, present was India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Take a look.
The leaders of Russia and India were having a love-in. Note the hands. And then a huddle with their Chinese hosts. President Trump has imposed 50% tariffs on India because it continues to purchase Russian oil. President Trump's erratic foreign policy, 1 minute self-assigned global peacemaker, the next aggressive isolationist, has allowed China to present itself by contrast as a stable, predictable partner in a multipolar world.
Okay. So it's really interesting to kind of see this, public display of affection between Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi. They were literally holding hands, which I thought was interesting. And the whole point was to kind of provide this public display of unity, to kind of reaffirm their relationship. Obviously, it's a business type relationship, it's a trade type relationship. But Russian oil accounts for 40% of India's supply, and that is not a small amount. And Russia, I guess to show favorability to India, especially since it's willing to continue exporting oil from Russia, has discounted per barrel $3 to $4 for India specifically for the next 2 months. So, Putin is looking to sweeten the deal for India. But I think what stands out the most about this, guys, is the fact that at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, again, hosted by China, you have Narendra Modi present. Narendra Modi was kind of singing sweet nothings in China's ear. And to kind of give you context, India and China have not had a friendly relationship. Really, what has happened is, Donald Trump's policies have essentially pushed India into China's arms, which is, I don't think, the best policy in terms of what you're looking for in the best interests of the American people. And by the way, we do rely on India for quite a bit of trade. Now, Trump is downplaying that, but India happens to be our 9th largest trading partner. We do rely on them for imports, including textiles, precious gems, steel, machinery, and more. So I'm curious what you ladies think about this, especially Senator Sinema, to be honest with you, because, you spent time in the Senate. What do you think about how Trump has handled trade and, just geopolitical matters?
So I think a couple things to just kind of set the table for a conversation like this is to know that, President Trump doesn't have strong opinions on lots of things. But when he does have a strong opinion, he has that strong opinion. And he believes in tariffs, period. Trump believes in tariffs. And so the tariff conversation is not going to go away. And it's going to be shaped by his core beliefs. So that's the first thing I would say is you can be like, oh, I'm frustrated because of this impact of his decisions. That's fine. You can be frustrated. But Trump is going to Trump. He believes in tariffs. And so, number one, knowing that he believes in tariffs and thinking to yourself, what does that look like in the context of these interactions that are not just about goods and trade, but as we see, also about geopolitics. So that's the first thing I would think about. The second thing I would think about is the efforts that the United States is making under this administration to increase domestic energy production, right? So President Trump stood up a group called the National Energy Defense Council. It's headed up by Jared Agan, super smart guy, 100% focused on increasing American domestic energy production, which would make us less reliant on foreign or volatile sources for energy. That's supported, of course, across the administration, Secretary Wright, Secretary Burgum, across the entire administration, Administrator Zeldin and others. So kind of thinking about those two things is really important to help situate this conversation, to know that it's not just about, oh, is India cozying up to China or cozying up to Russia? What do they need from them? What do they want from them? I mean, look, guys, it makes sense that the president of India is going to work closely with whomever is providing him with the greatest source of energy for his country. He has to provide energy for his country. So that's not weird. That is what a leader does, right?
That's totally normal. I mean, I would expect that from India, but I have a follow-up question to that. Sorry, ladies, but I think this is important.
No, go, Anna. It's a very interesting. Keep going.
So when you talk about the need to increase energy production at home, I hear you. And I think most Americans think it works in a certain way where, the country that produces the energy gets to benefit from it first and foremost. But as we know, certainly with the OPEC plus cartel setup, it's basically a global energy supply. So our oil companies or our natural gas companies can produce, as much oil or natural gas as they want, but there's really no regulation stopping them from selling it on the international stage, and they're going to sell it to the highest bidder, right? So how does that benefit Americans? Right.
I mean, that's the free market. So I mean, that makes sense. I get it. What we have to do is create incentives for us to utilize our own energy in our own country, right? And with the advancement of AI and the race that we're in against China to dominate the AI war, right? I see this as a national security imperative. We are literally in a war with China to determine whether or not the globe is going to use American AI values or whether they're going to have to rely on Chinese Communist Party AI values, right? We don't win that war if we don't control the energy production. So if we can't produce enough energy to power the AI right here in our country, we will not beat China. And so you've got to think about both the capitalism here, right? You're going to produce energy and sell it to the highest bidder, but also the national security imperative of what happens if we don't win this AI war? What happens if China does become the leading AI voice and producer of AI tools for the globe? And so I think at that point, you're starting to talk to American energy companies about not just capitalism, which we all believe in, but also national security. Where does your loyalty and where do your priorities lie? And how can we induce incentives for American companies to produce more American energy through all the sources, right? We need every electron available. We need every bit of energy available that can be produced. We need it right here in our own country. How do we both create that financial incentive and help everyone understand the national security imperative? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. What about nuclear? Did you guys ever discuss nuclear in the Senate?
Yeah, we do a ton. So this is a big part of the NEDC's work, and I'm really excited. One of the things I'm working on now is I'm the chair of a group called the AI Infrastructure Coalition. My co-chair is former Congressman Garrett Graves of Louisiana, energy expert, genius. And we're actually working closely with the administration to increase nuclear production, small modular reactors, investing in nuclear fission research, because that is going to be a very powerful and plentiful and clean source of energy for the future. But in the meantime, before we get there on nuclear, we've got to dramatically increase our production of traditional energy sources. So continuing to do work around natural gas, increasing like our oil production domestically, but also ensuring that we're making solar affordable. Like we've got to kind of use all of those energy sources together to fuel this future.
Senator Sinema, thank you so much for joining us today. I have a quick response to, or just a question to something that you just said. I am deeply concerned about the war between the United States and China in terms of AI. And I'm just curious, I do have another thing to say after this though, but I wanted to get your thoughts on whether it's a good idea for NVIDIA to sell chips to China. Jensen Huang and Trump are in talks about selling, and perhaps the United States even benefiting apart from these sales. Is a really good idea to give them this intel if we are locked in this conflict, this Cold War conflict with them in terms of AI. It definitely concerns me, especially with DeepSeek and everything that's going on. And it seems like China is pulling ahead in this tussle. But going back to the summit on the whole, I think one of the most significant things coming out of this is the fact that Slovakia, which guess what, is a NATO member, attended the summit. I think that is a tremendous deal because the NATO alliance is a famously Western alliance. It's led by the United States and it's shaped by the post-war order. Now we see Slovakia inching into China's arms, and they're even questioning whether they should remain in our alliance. Yeah. So I think right now we have to be extremely careful about the bluster that we're exhibiting on the international stage because it might have a lot of unintended consequences, which is strengthening China's hand. I mean, Xi Jinping is looking he's gloating right now. He's getting chummy with so many people that we had tried to court over the decades.
I want to put a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator. Go ahead and answer that.
Go ahead.
Well, I want to put a question to all of you, given what all three of you have said thus far, right? If I'm looking at the broad strokes of this, what does Trump want with Putin? He wants to end the war in Ukraine. He's tried diplomacy. It doesn't work. So now we're back to NATO buying weapons from us and arming Ukraine and going back to sanctions and secondary sanctions. But he tried diplomacy and it didn't work. Okay, now what do we want with India? Well, obviously, as Anna mentioned, they're a huge trade partner for us, but we also want to maintain balance in the world's power, right? So we want to empower India to keep China in check. And that's not working. So then I would simply say, what is an alternative strategy? Because if I'm Trump and he's trying diplomacy and that's not working, and he's trying sanctions and he's trying tariffs, all of these things, what do we recommend? Because these are real problems.
Yeah.
Good question.
The United States is still doing business with Russia. So we could even restrict our own actions where we're not willing to yet. Yeah. I think we definitely need to. We should have been willing 2 years ago, from my point of view. But the United States is actively doing business with Russia. We are still buying your stuff, and that's fueling their war effort.
So we've got to really think about this from a multifaceted strategy, right? So Jillian, you said, okay, so we tried diplomacy and it didn't work, and then we tried sanctions and it didn't work. And the reality is that if you want to have an impact at the geopolitical scale, you've got to attack it from multiple angles and see it as a coordinated strategy rather than just a one-off here or a one-off there, right? And it's like so deeply American to be like, well, we did that one summit and it didn't work. The reality is, and you know this, when you're working on a strategy, it takes years to plan. It takes years to execute. You've got to have like multifaceted elements. You've got to think about it from this like holistic perspective. And so I guess the one thing I would say is that as civilians, we might look and say, well, you know, he tried that summit and it didn't work, and he tried these sanctions and it didn't work. And something to consider is that, you know, maybe there's more going on than you read about in the newspaper or see on the news, that maybe there is a multifaceted strategy that's going to roll out over time. It's going to take time to implement. It's going to take time to have impacts. But Lindy's point is a really important one. Both the point about NATO folks who are kind of sneaking out and bleeding over into the, quote, other side That's a concern. How do we address that? Lindy, I mean, you create incentives for folks to stay with you, right? You have to create incentives for folks to stay with you. And you've got to do that from both a financial and a geopolitical perspective.
Thank you so much for watching Her Take. If you like the show, can you help us out by subscribing to the channel, clicking the notification button, sharing, commenting, joining the conversation? It helps us out a ton with the algorithm. We appreciate you.